There are many myths and prejudices about communism. Some people think that communism is a utopian dream inspired only by faith in a brighter future. Others depict it as a dystopian dictatorship in which people are forced to march in formation, wear identical clothes, and suppress their initiative. Without a better perspective of what communists are offering for society, what they're actually fighting for, such Philistines cannot advance beyond cliches and stereotypes, which have little in common with reality. In this video, we will review the most popular myths about communism and tell you what communists are really trying to achieve. Myth number 1. Communism is a dictatorship. Communists are often accused of lacking the democratic qualities of Western countries, of cutting rights and freedoms to put power in the hands of one dictatorial leader. On the contrary, freedom of the bourgeois democratic state is merely illusion and hypocrisy. This kind of freedom is nothing more than the unrestricted power of the rich to spin their lies among the populace through the media they control, their freedom to possess factories, universities, land, and luxurious estates as their own personal property. This is the freedom for the capitalists to ruthlessly exploit workers and punish any person who dares to resist their rule. Even in the most democratic capitalist countries, there is not a single one without those loopholes and reservations in their laws which provide the ruling class with the opportunity to wipe away their liberal illusion and use armed force against the working class, enact brutal martial law, restrict all those once cherished rights and freedoms in case of disorder. That is, in the case of the workers' attempts to free themselves from their servitude to capital. In order to maintain unquestioned power, the capitalist class must disguise its dictatorship beneath varying forms of parliamentarism, the pretty face of democracy and freedom, while at the same time keeping the masses dissuaded from interrupting their governing apparatus, which protects the interests of capitalist profiteering. Control of government by the working class, which can also be called the dictatorship of the proletariat, is established after the liquidation of the dictatorship of capitalists and the abolition of private property. This majority rule is more democratic than any form of bourgeois democracy that has ever existed. The dictatorship of the proletariat is the rule of the working people over an immiserated group of capitalists whose wealth and prosperity only come from the appropriation of other people's labor. The empowerment of the working class gives workers the basic human rights which they have long been denied, the broad rights to fully participate in social, economic, and political life. These are rights which have not and will not be given to the majority of people in a bourgeois democracy. Under socialism, democratic freedoms belong to the majority of people who know they are working for the benefit of all and not pursuing the interests of another. Socialism is not, however, the final development of society, but only the first step towards communism, a society of free and conscious workers, in which there will no longer be division by class, private property, no oppression of man by man. Under communism, necessary labor for the benefit of humankind will become the first conscious need, and the abilities of each will be used for the greatest possible benefit of the whole society. In the future communist society, all people will be involved in managing public affairs. The socialist worker state will eventually dissolve into popular self-government, making the complex apparatus of political power superfluous, and full democracy will be realized. Myth number 2. Communism is sameness. There is a belief that communism results in universal sameness, flattening the personal needs and private lives of individuals. Such myths are used widely in capitalist propaganda, but have nothing really to do with communism and Marxism. When communists discuss bringing about full equality, they do not mean an equalization of personal needs and lifestyles, but only the equalization of classes to the point where socioeconomic division is no more. Marxism advocates for the liberation of all workers from exploitation, the abolition of private ownership of the means of production by capitalists, under socialism for the equal duty to work according to one's abilities and receive according to one's labor, and under communism for the equal duty of all to work according to their abilities and the right of all workers to receive according to their needs. This is equality from the Marxist understanding, which is not recognized and does not recognize any other equality. To conclude from this that communism requires leveling of the needs of all of society, ignoring the tastes and private life of each individual. that according to the plan of Marxists, everyone should wear the same clothes and eat the same dishes in the same quantity. This is a propagandistic distortion of the communist project of Marxism-Leninism. Myth number 3. Communism causes deficits. Perhaps the favorite accusation leveled against communism and the socialist projects which try to achieve it is that a planned economy inevitably leads to a shortage of goods. As their evidence, capitalist supporters of a market economy often cite the Soviet Union during the time of perestroika, an economic depression which is allegedly the result of a socialist economic system. In reality, communism and socialism have nothing to do with deficits. In fact, socialist production is based out of creating the abundance necessary to maximize the satisfaction of the needs of all people. Unlike under the small capitalist countries, in the USSR there was a complete productive independence. Thanks to a socialist economy, the country produced a full range of all the necessary goods entirely on its own, the nomenclature of which is dictated not by fashion, but by the real needs of the population. The causes of the historical deficit in the USSR do not come from any fundamental qualities of a socialist economy based on public property. The economic shortfall is a direct consequence of the introduction of market elements into a planned economy, which began in 1965, the Kosygin reforms, and finally ended in the dissolution of public ownership, finally culminating between 1985 and 1991. Market reforms undermined the work of the planned economy by reintroducing capitalist arrangements. Soviet industry and collective farms still produced a huge amount of products. However, this production no longer filled the shelves of Soviet stores. The expanding influence of the market and the abolition of the state monopoly on foreign trade led to the fact that the bulk of goods, which were once produced primarily for the satisfaction of domestic consumption, were then exported at higher prices for the generation of profit, depriving citizens of their basic necessities. Thus, the deficit was not caused by any socialist plan, but was the logical result of the transition to a capitalist economy and the revision of the principles of Marxism by Soviet leadership. Myth number 4. Communism is take and divide. The myth that communists want to take away everything that people own is intentionally cultivated in a capitalist society, and for good reason. Playing on the looming fears of losing what little property working people own, the capitalists attract wider sections of the petty bourgeoisie, intelligentsia, and upwardly mobile workers to their own anti-communist agenda. In reality, the communists are primarily concerned with the destruction of the private ownership of the means of production, which is the capitalist basis for the exploitation of man by man. Communists propose for the means of production, the factories, grocery stores, farms, and more, to be the possession of the whole society, and for all public goods to be distributed fairly according to need. At the same time, the right of personal ownership, of income based on work, of consumer goods, and of personal items is protected under socialist law. Some people understand the phrase according to need too vulgarly, imagining how the communist system at the click of a finger will give them hundreds of sports cars or 3-story yachts if they choose to need such luxury item. This is an insipid approach, since we're talking about those objective needs which no person can do without for food, clothing, housing, affordable education, and medicine. Those same needs which, under capitalism, are subjectively parsed out or denied for profit. As for yachts or cars, we can today observe the prerequisites for this kind of satisfaction of needs. Social cooperation such as car sharing can just as feasibly satisfy a person's real need for movement, but not for the satisfaction of personal vanity. Today, the needs of transportation are a service for which you must pay, often exorbitantly in the case of personal vehicles. Under communism, the development of the means of production and the qualitative increase in labor productivity will allow everyone to use equally any item that might be necessary. Thus, communism is not take and divide, but to add together and increase the talents, products, and possibilities of everyone for the prosperity of all. Myth number 5. Communism is utopia. For people with only a simple understanding, communism is pictured as a perfect society, devoid of any problems or contradictions, and therefore one of the most frequent attacks on communism is the accusation of its impossible utopianism. However, the era of utopian communist theorizations ended with the developments made by Marx and Engels. Thanks to their work, communism acquired a scientific basis through the universal laws of material development, the laws of the historical process, and the nature perspective of the observable capitalist system. Communism ceased to be a product of the daydreaming mind, which only represented a possible society, and became a scientific forecast derived from a vigorous study of actual conditions. Socialism and communism are a certain way of organizing the production and distribution of material goods, in which the means of producing goods are in public ownership. That is, that they wholly belong to the majority of working people, and not to a ruling few as under previous historical systems, like capitalism or feudalism. Despite false statements made by the defenders of capital, there is nothing utopian about building such a social system. The experience of the first historical socialist state, the Soviet Union, showed in practice that communism is not a utopian dream, but proved that enormous victories can be won for the majority of humankind through socialism. In place of a backward slave-driven monarchy, an advanced society of the working class appeared in an unprecedentedly short time, whose epoch in world history will never be forgotten, and whose influence is felt by the world over. Despite the collapse of Soviet socialism caused by objective and identifiable conditions, the USSR became a prototype model for the future projects of humanity, the first attempt by the working class to build a society without war, exploitation, and oppression. The example of the Soviet Union was a definite confirmation of the accuracy of Marxism, as well as proof of how another world can be possible when capitalism is crushed. Stay tuned.